The morning always started the same way. 5:30, before the birds, before the first truck rolled through on Route 89, before any of the 23 trailers and Crestline mobile estates stirred with the sounds of coffee makers and coughing and televisions turned low, Edna Briggs was already awake. She moved through her small kitchen, the way she had always moved through small spaces that demanded precision quietly, deliberately, without waste. The coffee measured to the exact same line on the filter. The burner turned to medium, never high, because Roy had always said high heat burned the flavor out, and Roy had been right about most things. She filled his old mug, the one with the faded image of the Grand Canyon that she had bought him on their 35th anniversary trip, the one she had never once considered throwing away. She stood at the window above the sink and looked out at the Arizona morning. The sky over the San Francisco peaks was still that particular blue-black that existed only in the last minutes before dawn broke. The juniper trees along the back fence of the property were perfectly still. The gravel lot between the trailers was empty and silver with cold dew. In the summer, the mornings here could make you forget all the rest of it. The heat that hammered down by noon, the unpaid bills on the kitchen table, the particular silence of a house that had once held more people. In the summer, for about 20 minutes every morning, Flagstaff looked like the beginning of something. Edna drank her coffee. She had been here for 19 years. She and Roy had moved from Tucson when his lungs first started giving him trouble, and his pulmonologist had recommended drier air and lower elevation. They had rented trailer number 7 because it was the only one with a covered porch on both sides, which Roy said was essential for a man who intended to sit outside every evening and watch the world go by. He had sat on that porch for 11 years. Hani had watched the world go by until the world stopped cooperating. And then in March of 2016, on a Tuesday morning, not unlike this one, Roy Briggs had died in the small bedroom at the back of trailer number 7 with Edna's hand in his. She still slept on her side of the bed. She had her routines: coffee, the window, then out onto the east-facing porch with her second cup to watch the actual sunrise the moment the light broke over the mountain and turned the whole gravel lot from silver to gold, then back inside. Toast, the crossword from the newspaper she still had delivered because Roy had always gotten the paper, and some things you simply did not stop doing. Then the watering. She kept 11 pots on the 2 porches, mostly lavender and rosemary, because those were the things that held up in the dry heat, though she also kept 1 pot of climbing roses near the east corner that Roy had planted himself, that she fought to keep alive every summer as an act of something she had no precise word for. After the watering, she had her walk. 3 laps around the perimeter road of Crestline Mobile Estates, a quarter-mile each. Her knees had opinions about this, but Edna had learned over 74 years that knees could be negotiated with if you were patient and consistent. She wore the same gray New Balance shoes she had ordered from the catalog 18 months ago. She carried a small aluminum walking stick that Roy's brother had sent her from Oregon after Roy died, which she had accepted graciously and used only on the mornings when the air was particularly cold and the gravel was uncertain underfoot. She was on her second lap when she heard it. The sound came from outside the main entrance of the park, where the gravel drive met the paved access road. First, the engine enormous, unhealthy stuttering in a way that a machine that size should not stutter. Then the longer sound, lower and slower, of something very heavy going down. Not a car accident. The pitch was wrong, more like a controlled collapse. Edna turned and walked toward the entrance without breaking stride. She had long since stopped running toward emergencies. Running toward an emergency accomplished nothing except arriving breathless and unable to think clearly. She had learned that in her second year as a floor nurse at Flagstaff Medical, when a senior colleague named Ruth Holden had taken her firmly by the shoulder and said, "Edna, your feet are a tool. Use them to get there. Your brain is also a tool. Do not shake it loose on the way." The motorcycle was a large black Harley Davidson lying on its right side in the gravel shoulder just past the entrance gate. The engine had cut out. The back wheel was still turning slowly, ticking down. The man who had been riding it was on the ground, approximately 6 feet from the bike on his back, one leg still half extended as though he had tried to catch himself. I was very large, well over 6 feet, built through the chest and shoulders in a way that made the ground beneath him look inadequate. He wore heavy black boots, dark jeans, and a leather vest over a long-sleeved shirt. The vest had patches on it, the kind she had seen on bikers her entire adult life, and had in her earlier years assigned a reflexive category of concern to. Now she looked past the patches at the man. His color was wrong. Too pale a grayish white that had nothing to do with the cold morning and everything to do with what was happening inside him. He was breathing, but the breaths were shallow and irregular. His hands were trembling. His eyes were half open and pointed at the sky, but not seeing it. Edna was already moving toward him. She crouched beside him, her knees commenting again but manageable, and pressed two fingers to the inside of his wrist. Pulse was there, rapid and weak and thready. She looked at the way his muscles were moving, the micro tremors in his jaw and forearms. She looked at the sweat on his face in 50-degree air. She looked at the medic alert bracelet on his right wrist that read in plain capital letters, type 1 diabetic. Hypoglycemia, severe. He had been riding on a blood sugar that had no business being behind the wheel of anything. And now the tank was empty and his body was beginning the long, slow shutdown that happened when the brain ran out of fuel. She stood it up, walked back to her trailer at a measured pace, went inside. From the cabinet above the refrigerator, she retrieved the plastic bin she had always kept there out of habit from 32 years of nursing, and from the particular knowledge that you lived alone in an isolated trailer park in northern Arizona, and the nearest emergency room was 22 minutes away on a good day. Inside the bin, glucose tablets, a tube of glucose gel, a small bottle of orange juice she kept specifically for this purpose, and replaced every 3 months, and the blood pressure cuff Roy had used that she had kept because it still worked, and there was no reason to throw away something that still worked. She also picked up her phone and dialed 911. She told them what she had and what she suspected. She gave them the address. She told them he was breathing and conscious, but deteriorating, and that she was a retired registered nurse, and she was going back out to him now. Then she went back out. She opened the orange juice and knelt beside him again. Raised his head, carefully supporting the neck the way you supported it when you did not know the history and the ground was hard. She got 2 ounces of juice into him, slowly watching for the swallow reflex, watching that he did not aspirate it. Then the glucose gel applied to the inside of his cheek the way she would have done it on a ward. Then she sat back on her heels and waited for the first wave of it to begin working. It would take minutes. She had minutes. That was when the truck pulled up. It was a large pickup lifted with oversized tires and an aggressive chrome grille that seemed designed to communicate something about its owner. It parked crooked on the access road with the casual disregard of someone who had never in his life worried about inconveniencing anyone else. 3 young men got out. The driver was the oldest, maybe 24, big through the shoulders, with the particular muscular softness of someone who lifted weights but had never done hard physical labor. He wore expensive, athletic clothes and boots that had never seen mud. He looked at the man on the ground, and then he looked at Edna, and a particular expression moved across his face. The expression of a person who has located a situation in which he has complete power. "What happened to this guy?" he said, not to Edna specifically, more to the air. "Medical emergency," Edna said without looking up from the man on the ground. "I need you to stay back." "He one of those biker guys," the driver said. He was walking closer. His 2 companions followed gravitationally the way that type always moved in groups. "You guys think you own everything." "Sir," Edna said. Her voice was very level. She had used this voice in emergency rooms and trauma bays and in the room where she had told families that the news was not good. "I need you to step back." The driver crouched down on the other side of the man, not to help, but to look. He was close enough that Edna could smell the cheap cologne and the earlier part of the morning on him. He reached out one hand toward the vest, toward the patches, with the idle curiosity of someone picking up a rock to see what was under it. "Do not touch him," Edna said. The driver looked at her for the first time with actual attention. He seemed genuinely surprised. He was used to being the most significant object in any space he entered, and a 74-year-old woman in gray walking shoes telling him, "Do not," in that particular tone was apparently something his experience had not prepared him for. "Lady, relax, I am just looking. You are not a doctor. You are not emergency services. Your looking does not help him, and your proximity is in my way. Please step back." The driver stood up slowly. He looked down at her from his full height in the way men sometimes did when they wanted to remind you of the arithmetic of size. Edna looked back at him without adjustment. She had stood at the beds of men dying in pain, and she had not looked away from that, and she was not going to look away from a boy in expensive boots on an access road. "Where is his wallet?" one of the companions said. He was moving around toward the saddlebags on the downed motorcycle. "Step away from that," Edna said. I'm just checking if he has any ID, the companion said, with an innocence so performed it was almost artistic. No, you are not. Edna stood up, both knees sharp. She moved between the companion and the motorcycle with the calm deliberateness of someone repositioning in a tight ICU bay. Step away. The driver was next to her now, very close, looking down. You need to mind your own business, old woman, he said quietly, before you get hurt. This was the moment. Edna recognized it. She had been a nurse for 32 years, and before that she had grown up in rural Montana with 4 brothers and a father who had opinions, and she knew what this moment was. This was the moment where you had two choices. You made yourself small, you found an exit, you waited for the situation to resolve itself. Or you did not. She looked at him steadily. Your name is Curtis Strickland, she said. She watched his face. Your father is Wade Strickland. He has been sending legal notices to the residents of this park for the past 3 weeks regarding a property dispute. I have read all of them. She kept her voice even and conversational, the same tone she used with families when she was delivering information they needed to hear. I recognize you because your father's company had a photograph of the development team on the permits they filed with the county. You were in that photograph. Curtis stared at her. And you are standing, she continued, on property that is currently in an active legal dispute. Anything you take from that man on the ground, or anything you do to that man on the ground will occur on property where I am a long-term resident and a direct party to that dispute, which means I am a witness withstanding. She let that settle. Do you understand what that means, Curtis? Something moved behind his eyes, not shame exactly, something closer to recalculation. Whatever, he said. He stepped back. He nodded to his companions. They got back in the truck. The truck reversed out of the access road and drove away too fast for the gravel, which was the only concession to being rattled that he was willing to make. Edna watched the truck until it was out of sight. Then she turned back to the man on the ground. His color had shifted. Still pale, but different. The sharp gray undertone was pulling back. His eyelids were moving. His hands had stopped their violent trembling and were now doing the slower, voluntary kind of movement that meant the glucose was beginning its work. He was coming up from it slowly, the way a deep water swimmer came up, not fast, not dramatic, but inexorable. She sat down on the gravel beside him, not because her knees required it, though they were grateful, because she had learned long ago that the best thing you could do for someone waking up confused and afraid in an unfamiliar place was to be close and at their level and quiet. Quiet. She sat beside him and she waited, and in the distance she could already hear the first tentative wail of an ambulance finding the road. His eyes opened fully about 4 minutes later. They were dark, brown, almost to black, and when they focused and found her face, the expression in them was one she had seen many times in her career. The particular disorientation of someone returning from a place they had not intended to go, looking at a stranger and trying to determine whether the stranger was help or harm. She kept her face still and open. You had a severe hypoglycemic episode, she said. Your blood sugar dropped dangerously low. I gave you glucose gel and juice. The ambulance is on its way. You are going to be all right. He looked at her for a long moment. His mouth moved. The first thing he said in a voice like gravel in a steel drum was, my bike. Your motorcycle is on the ground, but it appears undamaged. We can look at it more closely once you are stable. I was trying to sit up. She put one hand on his chest gently. Not yet, she said. Give it 2 more minutes. Your body needs time to stabilize before you change your position. If you sit up too fast, you will gray out again. He stopped. He looked at her hand on his chest, then at her face, then at the sky. How did you know what to do? He asked. I was a nurse for 32 years. A long pause. The sky above them had gone from blue-black to a deep bronze as the sun cleared the mountain. The light was coming now, horizontal and golden, catching the chrome on his motorcycle and turning it briefly brilliant. I am Holt, he said. Edna, she said. He closed his eyes again, but it was different now. The closing of a man resting, not a man slipping away. She stayed where she was. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. She did not go to the hospital. There was no reason for her to go. She had done what she could do. She had given them the information they needed, and her presence in a waiting room would accomplish nothing except sitting in a plastic chair for several hours and waiting for news about a stranger. She went back to her trailer. She finished her walk 2 more laps of the perimeter, though her mind was not entirely on it. She ate her toast. She tried the crossword. She could not settle. It was not the event itself that unsettled her exactly. She had seen far worse in 32 years of nursing. What was working at the edge of her attention was what had happened before the ambulance. Curtis Strickland and the deliberateness with which he had stopped when she named him. She had not been entirely sure it would work. She had recognized him, that part was true. She had been paying close attention to the legal documents since the first one arrived 6 weeks ago, a certified letter addressed to all residents of Crestline Mobile Estates regarding a property ownership claim filed by Strickland Development LLC with the Coconino County Recorder's Office. She had read it 3 times. Then she had gone online slowly and methodically, the way she did everything, and she had found the development company's website and the county filing records, and she had begun to understand what was being constructed around her. The other residents had received the same letter. She knew because she had knocked on doors. Most of them were afraid. The Garfield family in Trailer 12 with 3 kids under 10, old Herbert Watts in Trailer 4, who was 81 and had been at Crestline longer than Edna. The younger couples who were here because it was what they could afford while they built something else. They were afraid in the specific way of people who had been maneuvered before and had learned that institutions did not generally protect you and that the best outcome you could hope for was to lose less rather than win. They had not signed the letter of dispute that Edna had drafted. She had signed it alone. She understood why they had not. She had no judgments about it. She had spent enough time with frightened people to know that fear was not a character failing. But she had also spent enough time with frightened people to know that someone had to be the one who stood still. Roy had always said she was the most stubborn woman he had ever met. He had said it the way you said something true about a person you loved, not as criticism, but as acknowledgement. You do not know when to stop, Edna. And she had always told him that stopping was a choice you made, and she had not made that one yet. She found what she needed in the documents. The ownership chain traced back through 3 holding companies, each with a different registered agent in a different county, each with formation dates that were staggered in a way that took deliberate planning. The rezoning application had gone through a process that should have required a public comment period, but did not appear to have had one. The filing dates were precise, and the processing times were irregular in a specific direction. She had been building the case before she knew she would need allies. She had been building it because it was the thing that needed building, and she was the one who could see it. She was at the kitchen table with the file of legal documents when she heard the sound for the second time that week: motorcycles. More than one, many more. She counted 34 from the window. They came in 2 waves, the sound arriving before them, that particular low vibration that you felt in your sternum. They filled the access road and spilled into the gravel lot of Crestline Mobile Estates with the orderly precision of people who were accustomed to arriving together in places and making an impression. They were not being disruptive about it. They simply were what they were, which was more than sufficient. The man at the front was not Holt. I was similar in scale, large, road-worn, but older in the face with a trimmed gray beard and eyes that were the precise color of winter sky. He wore the same kind of vest with the same patches, but with additional patches that Edna did not know the significance of but could read plainly as rank. He moved like someone who was accustomed to entering rooms and having them reconfigure around him. Edna opened her front door before he reached the bottom porch step. She had the broom. She had gone out to sweep the porch after breakfast, as she did every second morning, and she had simply continued sweeping, and she was still holding the broom, which she realized later must have made for a particular image. A 74-year-old woman with gray hair and a broom standing on her trailer steps, looking at 34 bikers with the placid expression of someone who had been expecting them to arrive. The man at the front stopped. He looked up at her. The trace of something moved across his face. It might have been surprise, or it might have been something closer to humor, though it was a very contained version of either. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low and deliberate. "My name is Rex Donovan. I ride with the Iron Riders. You helped one of our men this morning." "I did," Edna said. "We would like to speak with you if you are willing." She looked past him at the 33 other men waiting in the lot. She looked at their faces. The variety of them. Some young, some near her age, some she would have been unable to guess. All of them watching her with the same expression, which was the expression of people who were waiting to take their cue from her. They were not posturing. They were not trying to make her understand how many of them there were. They were simply there. "I have coffee on," she said. "There is not enough for all of you, but I expect you know that." Rex Donovan's mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Just me, if that is all right, he said. She held the door open. He sat at her kitchen table in the chair Roy had always used, which was the chair with the slightly better padding because Roy's back had needed it, and which Edna never used herself out of a habit of preservation she had never examined too closely. Rex Donovan sat in it without knowing any of that, and somehow that was fine. He looked right in it. He had the same settled quality that Roy had always had, the quality of a person who knew exactly where they were and had no intention of pretending otherwise. She set coffee in front of him. He accepted it with both hands. How is he? She asked. Holt. Stable. They are keeping him overnight. He will be out tomorrow. Rex looked at the mug in his hands. He told us what you did, what you said to the men who came. I told them facts, Edna said. Facts are usually more useful than anything else in those situations. Rex was quiet for a moment. The Strickland boy. Yes, you know who they are. I've been paying attention, Edna said. She sat down across from him with her own coffee. Would you like to see the file? Something shifted in Rex Donovan's expression. He looked at her, really looked the way people rarely looked at women her age, as though they expected to find something of actual substance there, and were genuinely curious whether they would. Yes, he said, I would. She got up and retrieved the folder from the counter. She spread the documents across the table between them. The certified letters, the county recorder printouts, the ownership chain she had traced back through 3 holding companies to Strickland Development. The filing dates the timeline she had written out by hand in her particular precise nurse's handwriting. Rex looked at it for a long time without speaking. He picked up the timeline. He set it down. He picked up the county filing. You did all of this yourself, he said, not a question. I'm retired, she said. I have time. Do you have a lawyer? I have spoken with one. She tells me there are grounds to challenge the ownership claim, but it will require a formal response filing with documentation by the end of the month. Edna paused. The filing fee is not inconsequential and the documentation is complex. She is also not certain how the county recorder's office will weigh the evidence because someone appears to have had conversations with people in that office. Rex looked at her steadily. Wade Strickland has a friends in places that matter, Edna said, with the precision of someone who had traced the connections. He has been doing this for some time, not just here. How do you know that? Because I looked, she said simply. Rex set down his coffee. He leaned back in Roy's chair and looked at her across the table, and what was in his face now was not the guarded assessment of a man deciding whether to extend trust. It was something that looked more like recognition. The expression of a person who has been looking for a particular thing and has unexpectedly found it in an unexpected place. What do you need? He asked. I need someone who understands how to find what has been deliberately hidden, she said. I need the right documentation to get to the county recorder's office through a channel that Wade Strickland has not already reached. And I need, she stopped. She looked at her coffee. I need the other families in this park to know that someone is standing with them, not over them, with them. We can do all of that, Rex said. I am not asking for anything that crosses a line, she said. I need to be clear about that. I have spent 32 years working within systems that were designed to help people, and I know those systems can be corrupted, but I also know they can work when the right information reaches the right people through the right channels. That is what I am asking for. Rex held her gaze for a moment. That is exactly what I am offering, he said. Outside, the 33 men waited in the gravel lot of Crestline Mobile Estates. Some of them were talking quietly. Some of them were just standing in the particular comfortable silence of people who were used to standing together. Herbert Watts had emerged from Trailer 4 and was standing on his porch looking at them with an expression that had started as alarm and was slowly becoming something else. Inside Trailer 7, over a kitchen table, covered in documents, that told the story of a man who thought he could take things from people who had nothing to lose. A retired nurse and a biker club president drank their coffee and began to build a case. Later that evening, after Rex and his riders had gone, Edna sat on the east porch with her second cup of coffee of the afternoon, which was technically one more than she normally allowed herself. She thought about Curtis Strickland's face when she said his name. She thought about what it meant that Wade had sent his own son to do the early intimidation work. Either he was careless, which she doubted the legal filings were careful, methodically constructed, or he was confident that no one in this park had the resources or the standing to connect the son to the father to the strategy. He had not counted on her. That was fair. Most people did not. She thought about Holt on the ground with that grayish pallor and the way his eyes had found her face when he came back up and the particular expression on them. She had seen that expression on patients before, the expression of a person returning from somewhere and finding against expectation that someone had been there the whole time. She thought about Roy. She thought about her son Danny, who had been 27 when he died in Kandahar province, which was 11 years ago now, and who she thought about every day in the way you thought about a thing that had become part of the texture of existence. Not sharp anymore, just there, woven in. She had not told Holt about Danny. She had not told him about Roy. She had sat on the gravel beside a stranger and waited for the glucose to do its work, and that was what the moment had required, and she had given the moment what it required. She picked up the small notebook she kept by the porch chair and wrote down the three things she needed to verify tomorrow. The chain of title on the second holding company, the contact information for the county recorder's office supervisor, not the front desk, the supervisor and the name of the reporter at the Flagstaff paper who covered county development issues. She had read his byline several times. He wrote carefully. He understood zoning. She closed the notebook. The mountains were dark against the sky, going from orange to deep purple. A coyote was talking somewhere beyond the back fence, the short declarative bark of something that had found what it was looking for. Edna sat on her porch. She had work to do. Holt Carver was discharged from Flagstaff Medical at 11 the following morning. Rex was waiting for him in the parking lot with a borrowed truck. The motorcycle would come later once it had been inspected, and three other riders who had apparently drawn the short straw on escort duty and were doing it with a particular affectionate grumbling of men who would have been there regardless. Holt walked out through the sliding glass doors, looking like a man who had lost an argument with the previous 24 hours, which he had but was declining to discuss it. He got in the truck. He looked out the window. Edna Briggs, he said, you get a read on her. Rex drove. I was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was deciding how to say something accurately. She had the whole situation mapped before we got there, Rex said. Property dispute. 3 holding companies. A county recorder's office she thinks has been reached. A timeline on paper in handwriting that looks like a blueprint. He paused. She had coffee ready. Holt looked at him. She knew we were coming. She expected someone would come, Rex said. She did not know who. She had coffee ready in case it turned out to be people worth talking to. He navigated the truck out of the hospital lot and onto Route 89. I think she decided we qualified. Holt looked back out the window. The mountains in the north were carrying a thin line of snow on their ridge lines from the previous week, white against the dark tree cover, precise as a ruled line. He thought about waking up on gravel with the sky above him and a stranger's face in his vision, calm and steady, saying you are going to be all right in the tone of someone who would not have said it if it were not true. I want to go see her, he said. I know, Rex said. We are going. This time there were 22 of them, which was fewer than the day before. Rex had made a judgment call about scale and Edna's porch dimensions. The remaining riders were carrying out the first task that Rex had assigned after leaving Crestline the previous afternoon. Research work, document retrieval, a conversation with a contact in the county assessor's office who owed Rex a favor that was now being called in. When they pulled in, Edna was in the east side yard with her garden pots pruning something back with a small pair of scissors, with the focused attention of a person doing a task they had done 10,000 times and still found worth doing correctly. She looked up at the motorcycles. She looked at Holt stepping off the back of Rex's truck. She set down her scissors. You are upright, she said. Yes, ma'am, Holt said. How is your color? He blinked. My color. Your skin tone. When you came up yesterday, you were still gray around the mouth. You look better. She said it as pure clinical observation, but she was looking at him with something underneath the observation. Did they run a full panel? They ran everything, he said. They want me to see my endocrinologist in 2 weeks. Good. She seemed satisfied. Do you have an endocrinologist you actually see or just one you are supposed to see? A long pause. I will take that as a no, she said. Rex, does this man have a primary care physician? Rex held up both hands. Edna made a sound that was not quite a sigh, but was in the neighborhood. She picked up her scissors and put them in her apron pocket and looked at both of them. Come in, she said. Both of you. The rest of them can use the porch tables. She had made food, not just coffee this time. There was a Dutch oven on the stove with what turned out to be beef stew, substantial and unshowy, the kind of thing that took hours and tasted like it. Cornbread in a cast iron pan. She set it on the counter and told them to help themselves and turned back to the table where her documents were spread. Holt stood in the small kitchen of her trailer and looked at the photographs on the refrigerator the way you naturally looked at photographs in someone's home. There was a man in most of them, broadly built, red-faced, with a grin that seemed to be his default expression. There was a wedding picture taken outside a white clapboard church. There was a photograph of a soldier in uniform that was set slightly apart from the others, pinned at the corner with a tack rather than a magnet, as though its placement was something that required deliberate care. He looked at the soldier for a long moment. Edna came back in and saw him looking. She did not say anything immediately. "Your son?" he asked. "Danny," she said. "Yes. Iraq, Afghanistan, 2009. She picked up a coffee mug and refilled it with the calm of long practice. He was 27. "I am sorry," Holt said. The words were inadequate, and he knew it, and said them anyway because some things were so true they needed saying even when they fell short. "Thank you." She said it the way people said it when they had said it 10,000 times and knew exactly what it meant and what it did not mean, and had made a kind of peace with both. She set the coffee down and looked at the photograph herself briefly and then back at the documents on the table. "Sit down. Rex pulled some information I want to go over with you." They sat. Rex spread the additional documents he had brought, a printout from the county assessor's website showing the ownership chain that had been filed on paper but not yet updated in the online database, which was a discrepancy that meant either negligence or deliberate delay. A land use record showing the same property had been rezoned commercially through a process that should have required a public comment period but did not appear to have had one. And a list of addresses, three other mobile home parks in Arizona, in Williams and Sedona, and Cottonwood, where Strickland Development had filed similar ownership claims in the previous 5 years. In each case, the residents had eventually left. Edna looked at the list. She looked at it for a long time. "How many families?" she asked. "Total best estimate somewhere over 200, Rex said. "Some of the parks were larger. We only have rough numbers." She was quiet. "He has been doing this for years," she said, not to them exactly, more to herself, and no one connected it. "Different counties," Rex said, "different holding companies for each project. He is careful about keeping them separate. Until now," she said. She looked up. "Because they are all in the same state. They are all under the same statute. If we can show pattern and practice that changes the character of the claim from a civil dispute to something that the state attorney general's office might have standing to consider." Rex looked at her. "You know about the AG's statute on predatory land acquisition," he said. "I read," she said with the faint implication that this should have been obvious. "I have been reading since we got the first letter. I have a library card and a computer in sufficient time. I also have a very patient reference librarian named Geraldine who helped me access some of the legal databases without a bar membership." Holt had been watching her throughout this exchange. He was a man who was accustomed to reading people. Road life required it, survival required it, 30 years of navigating situations that could go several ways, depending on who was reading the room accurately required it. And what he was reading in Edna Briggs was something he had not expected to find. He had come here expecting to discharge a debt. The direct debt of a life she had kept him alive on the ground. She deserved acknowledgement and material recompense. The club had a code about these things, and the code was clear. That was what he had understood before Rex's description of the previous afternoon's meeting. What he was understanding now was different. She was not waiting for rescue. She had been at war already and was conducting it with the tools she had, which were considerable. What she needed from them was not intervention, but alliance. The distinction mattered to him in a way he found difficult to immediately explain. "Tell me about the county recorder situation," Holt said. Edna looked at him, and the look was the look of a person deciding whether to say the true thing or the careful thing. She chose the true thing. "I believe someone in the recorder's office has been made aware that this claim is favorable to Strickland," she said. "I do not have evidence of money changing hands. What I have is a pattern of procedural delays on our response documents and accelerated processing on Strickland's filings that is statistically unusual." I noted the timestamps. She slid a printout across the table, a timeline of filing dates and processing times, precise to the hour. "The average processing time for a document in this office is 11 business days. Our response petition has been in process for 19. His original claim was processed in 4. Rex looked at the printout. He was quiet for a moment. I have a contact, he said carefully, in the recorder's office. Different department. He has been there a long time, and she has opinions about how the office is being run. He glanced at Edna. It would require sharing some of this. Does she have standing to report internally, Edna asked. She has tenure and a union representative and a particular disposition toward being underestimated, Rex said. Edna looked at him across the documents. Then yes, she said, share it. 3 days after that meeting, Curtis Strickland came back. He came in the evening this time, which was a different calculation than the morning had been. A morning visit is improvised reactive. He had seen the situation with Holt and made an opportunistic choice. An evening visit required planning. It was deliberate, which meant Wade knew about the conversation with Rex, which meant Wade had sources in the park or in the county office, or simply had enough confidence in his own surveillance of the situation that he felt no need to be subtle. He did not come alone. There were 4 of them this time, Curtis, 2 men, Edna did not recognize, and a third man she had seen once before at the park entrance. A heavy-set man in his 50s with a Strickland Development logo on his jacket, who had told Herbert Watts to think carefully about his options. They came after dark, which was a choice designed to minimize witnesses. They parked on the access road and came in on foot, which was a choice designed to minimize noise. What they did not know was that Edna had been expecting them. Not tonight specifically, but she had expected escalation. She had spent 32 years in environments where situations escalated, and she had learned to read the signs, and the signs had been clear. The legal challenge was gaining traction. Someone in the recorder's office had flagged the processing irregularities to Rex's contact, who had flagged it internally, which meant the clean legal path to removal was closing. When the legal path closed, men like Wade Strickland found other paths. She had installed the camera herself, or rather she had installed it with the help of Roy's old equipment manual in 3 hours of patient work on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a small unit, weatherproof, mounted on the corner post of the east porch in a position that covered both the front approach and the side yard. Roy had bought it years ago for the garage he never built, and it still worked because Roy had bought quality and Edna had stored it in conditions that prevented deterioration. It was recording when Curtis Strickland and his companions came through the gate at 9:40 in the evening. What they did, they cut the cable at the utility junction box that served the park's shared electrical connection, which was on the exterior east fence. They poured a substance, motor oil, Edna determined later, from the smell down the standpipe of the shared water well. They distributed roofing nails deliberately across the 3 main access paths through the park. Each action was methodical, practiced. This was not improvisation. This was a playbook. And then they drove away. Edna watched them do all of it from her kitchen light off camera feed running on her laptop screen. She documented what she saw with the same detached precision she had used to document patient deterioration for 32 years. Timestamps, actions, descriptions. She wrote in her notebook with the small lamp she had positioned so it would not be visible from the yard. She called Rex afterward. It is on camera, she said. Clear footage of Curtis Strickland and 4 other men committing property damage and tampering with shared utility infrastructure. I have the files saved and backed up to 2 separate locations. A pause on the line. You were watching, Rex said. I was watching, as she said. I did not interfere because I needed the footage to be clean. Interference would have created ambiguity. Another pause, longer. Edna, Rex said, and his voice had something in it now that she had not heard from him before. Something that was not quite admiration, because admiration implied surprise, and she thought he was past surprise. It was something more like alignment. 2 people on the same map. What do you want to do with it? I want to go through the proper channels, she said. Flagstaff Police Department, not the county sheriff's office. I have concerns about county-level interference at this point. The city police department has a property crimes unit. I spoke with them briefly 3 weeks ago about the general situation, and I found their sergeant responsive. You already made contact with the police. Preliminary contact. I wanted to have a relationship before I needed to use it. She paused. Roy always said you built your resources before the storm, not during it. Roy sounds like he was a wise man. I was, she said simply. I will send you the footage. Do not share it yet. I want to have it submitted formally before it circulates. Understood, Rex said. She sent the footage. She made a copy to a second drive. She wrote a detailed incident report in her notebook, time-stamped, cross-referenced with the camera files. She made tea and went to bed at 11:15, and she slept adequately, which was what she had trained herself to do through decades of overnight shifts. The next morning, two things happened. The first, Holt came back alone. He arrived at 7:30 on a borrowed motorcycle smaller than his own and knocked on her door at a reasonable volume and waited. She was on her second cup of coffee. She opened the door. "I do not need watching," she said. "I know," he said. "I brought this." He held out a small cardboard box. Inside it, a dozen glucose tablets, two backup glucose gel tubes, and a small written guide on managing type 1 hypoglycemia emergencies that he had clearly printed from a medical website and folded carefully into thirds. She looked at it. "For your kit," he said, "in case it happens again and I am the only one around." She took the box. She stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. He sat in Roy's chair again without being directed to it, with the same settled quality as before. She made him coffee. They sat at the kitchen table with the documents still spread across it, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had arrived by different routes at a particular recognition about each other. "You worked emergency medicine," he said. "Surgical mostly, some ICU in the early years." She held her mug with both hands. "Flagstaff for the last 18 years before I retired. Long time, long time." She looked at the documents in front of her, not reading them, just resting her eyes somewhere familiar. "Roy retired the same year I did. He had the lungs by then, but they were still manageable. We had 2 years of the same schedule for the first time in our marriage." She paused. "That was a good 2 years." Holt was quiet. "You have family?" she asked. She was not asking it as small talk. She was asking it as someone who asked questions because she intended to listen to the answers. He looked at the table, then at the photograph of Danny on the refrigerator. "A son," he said. "Tyler. He is 29, lives in Phoenix." A pause. "We do not talk much." "Why not?" The directness of it surprised him, though he was beginning to understand that her directness was not bluntness. It was the precision of someone who had learned that the careful version of a question sometimes produced the carefully constructed version of an answer, and she was not interested in either. "I made choices," he said. "The road, the club. His mother would have stayed if I had made different choices. I did not. Tyler was 12 when we divorced, which is a hard age to understand the reasons." He wrapped his hands around his own mug. "He is old enough to understand them now. I just do not know if he is interested in whether I have reasons." "Have you asked him?" "No." Edna looked at him. "Then you are spending an awful lot of time in a problem you have not actually started solving yet," she said without judgment, simply as fact. Holt looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. The particular expression of a person who has had a thing they already knew reflected back to them in a form that made it undeniable. "I found something in your wallet," she said, "when I was checking you for identification yesterday morning." She got up from the table and went to the counter drawer and retrieved a small photograph creased at one corner and slid it across the table. "I put it back after. I thought you should know I had seen it." He picked it up. A boy, maybe 10 years old, standing in front of a lake, grinning. The squinting, pure grin of a kid on a summer day with nowhere else he needed to be. "Tyler," he said. "Yes," she said. "I could tell." He held the photograph for a moment, looking at it with the expression of a man who was letting something cost him what it actually cost. "You do not carry a picture of someone you have given up on," she said quietly. "That is the thing to remember." The second thing that happened that morning was that Wade Strickland came to her door. He came at 10 o'clock alone in a silver SUV, wearing what was clearly his business version of himself: press, slacks, sport coat, the careful grooming of a man who understood that presentation communicated authority. He knocked with the confident knock of someone who was accustomed to knocking on doors and having them open promptly. Edna opened the door. She looked at him. He was 60-ish, well-built, with the weathered tan of someone who spent time outdoors for pleasure rather than labor, and the eyes of someone who had become accustomed to reading situations quickly and finding their angle. He was reading this one now, and she could see him doing it, the quick inventory of the small trailer and the old woman in the doorway, and the calculation of what kind of resistance this represented. "Mrs. Briggs," he said, with the careful warmth of a man who had been told she was the main obstacle and had decided to try cordiality before escalating. "I am Wade Strickland. I have been hoping we could talk." "I know who you are," she said. She held the door open. "Come in." He came in. He looked around the small interior of the trailer with an assessment that he probably thought was not visible, but Edna had been watching people assess things her entire adult life, and she could see him calculating the approximate value of the belongings and arriving at a figure that placed her in his estimation firmly in a category of people who could be made to see reason with the right numbers. She gestured to Roy's chair. He sat in it. She sat across from him and folded her hands on the table and looked at him with the full patient attention she had once given to difficult diagnoses. "I wanted to speak with you personally," he said, "because I think there may have been some miscommunication about the nature of our claim. We are not trying to displace residents without options. We have a relocation package that we would like." "Mr. Strickland," she said. He paused. She reached across the table and set a document on the surface between them. He looked at it. It was a copy of the title chain, the three holding companies, the subsidiary layers, the rezoning application, and across the top of the uppermost page she had written in her precise handwriting a single date and a case citation. He looked at it without touching it. "The State Predatory Acquisition Statute," she said. "That citation is a 2018 appellate ruling that extended its reach to include entities using sequential subsidiary structures to obscure beneficial ownership." She looked at him steadily. "You went through three holding companies. That is two more than the ruling requires." His face had not changed, but something behind it had. The cordiality had become calculation of a different kind. "I also have footage," she said, "from my exterior camera of your son and four other men tampering with the shared utility infrastructure of this park on the evening of the 15th. The footage has been submitted to the Flagstaff Police Department Property Crimes Unit and backed up in two external locations." He looked at her. "And I have," she continued with the same even tone, "a list of three other mobile home parks in Coconino and Yavapai counties, where Strickland Development LLC filed similar claims between 2019 and 2023, each of which resulted in the relocation of between 30 and 80 families. The pattern is documented. The State Attorney General's office finds patterns actionable." The room was very quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly on the access road, and one of the lavender pots on the porch shifted slightly in the morning wind, the dry sound of a pot against wood. "I am 74 years old," Edna said. "I have been sitting in this kitchen looking at your paperwork for 6 weeks. I was a nurse for 32 years. I worked a job that required me to pay close attention to things that other people overlooked and to think clearly under conditions of considerable stress." She looked at him across the table with the calm, steady look of someone who had nothing left to be afraid of losing. "I have a great deal of time and a great deal of attention, and I have nothing pressing to do with either of them except this." Wade Strickland sat in Roy's chair. He sat there for a long moment. The confident posture had settled into something that was still upright, but no longer projected anything except the effort of maintaining itself. "What do you want?" he said finally. "I want you to withdraw the ownership claim," she said. "I want you to remediate the damage done to the utility infrastructure on the night of the 15th. I want you to make no contact with any resident of this park directly or through an intermediary about relocation incentives or legal proceedings. And I want documentation of all of the above signed and notarized by the end of this month." I was quiet. "And if I do not, then the footage goes to the paper. The Attorney General's office receives our pattern documentation, and the police investigation into the utility tampering follows its natural course." She paused. "I suspect your son has enough difficulty ahead of him without adding criminal charges to it, but that is a decision you will have to make." He stood up. He was trying to reconstruct his posture, the authority of a man who was not rattled, but it was sitting on him wrong now, like a coat that no longer fit quite right. He left without another word. She watched his SUV out the window until it reached the main road. Then she picked up her phone and called Rex. "He came," she said. "I told him what we have." "How did he take it?" Rex said. "He left without agreeing to anything," she said. "But he also left without threatening anything. In my experience, when a man of that type leaves without making a threat, he is running a calculation, which means he thinks we might be right about the numbers. And if he calls the bluff, then we run the numbers," she said. "We have them. That is why I spent 6 weeks building them." She looked at the documents on the table. "Set up a call with the Attorney General's office contact. I want to understand the filing timeline. And ask your contact at the Recorder's office if there has been any unusual activity on our petition in the last 48 hours. "I will," Rex said. Then after a pause, "Edna, you doing all right?" She thought about this honestly the way she thought about most things. "I am doing what needs doing," she said. "That is the same as all right in my experience." Wade Strickland did not withdraw. Edna had allowed for this possibility. She had in fact considered it the more likely outcome of the two, because men who had succeeded through sustained pressure and legal maneuvering rarely abandoned their methods on the basis of a single conversation, no matter how well constructed. He would make a calculation. He would decide that her evidence, however compelling in presentation, might not hold up under the weight of the institutional momentum he had already built. He would decide that she was a 74-year-old retired nurse without legal credentials, and that the filing already 6 weeks in motion was more powerful than whatever she had assembled on her kitchen table. He would try one more thing. She did not know what it would be, but she knew it was coming. It came 3 days later at 8 in the morning in the form of a certified letter from a law firm she had never heard of in Phoenix, addressed to Edna Briggs and to Rex Donovan, personally informing them that Strickland Development LLC had filed a harassment and interference claim against both of them in Maricopa County Superior Court, and that all parties were advised to cease contact with Wade Strickland, Curtis Strickland, and all employees of Strickland Development LLC pending the outcome of proceedings. Edna read the letter twice. She set it down. She made coffee. Then she called the attorney she had been working with, Sandra Locke, a land use specialist in Flagstaff who had been building the response to the original ownership claim. Edna read the letter to her over the phone. "Maricopa County," Sandra said with a particular inflection that Edna had learned meant she was processing something she found professionally interesting. "He is trying to move the jurisdictional ground. If he can establish the dispute as originating in Maricopa, he can distance it from the Flagstaff Police Department investigation and the county recorder's irregularities. Can he do that? He can try. It will take him at least 3 weeks to establish standing for the Maricopa filing, and during that time, our original challenge is still active in Coconino County." A pause. "It is a delay tactic. He is buying time." "For what?" Edna asked. "Best guess, he is looking for a way to quietly withdraw that does not create a precedent. If he withdraws under pressure from the Attorney General's office, that sets a record. If he can make the whole thing dissolve into multiple jurisdictional disputes that eventually get resolved privately, there is less on the books." Edna considered this. "So he needs time, and he needs the Attorney General not to file before he can find his exit." "That is my read," Sandra said. "Then we need to submit to the Attorney General's office before he gets that time." "I agree," Sandra said. "I have been finalizing the pattern documentation. We have the 3 prior parks' solid ownership chain analysis and the utility tampering footage. I would like to add one more thing if we can get it." "What?" "A witness from one of the prior parks. Someone who can speak to experiencing the same pattern." Testimonial support for pattern and practice substantially improves the Attorney General's calculation on whether to act. Edna was quiet for a moment. "I will see what I can find," she said. She found it in 4 hours. Not through the club's contacts, though Rex had offered. She found it herself the way she found most things, methodically, through public records and phone calls, and the willingness to make 14 calls in sequence before she reached the right person. The right person was a woman named Dorothy Keller, 81 years old, who had been a resident of the Pinon Ridge Mobile Estates in Williams, Arizona, until November of 2019, when the park had been acquired by a holding company that was Edna had documented 3 degrees of separation from Strickland Development LLC. Dorothy Keller still lived in Williams in a small apartment because Pinon Ridge was now a storage facility with a corrugated metal facade where 83 families had once had their homes. Edna called her. Dorothy Keller answered on the second ring, and when Edna explained who she was and why she was calling, there was a long silence on the line that was not the silence of confusion, but the silence of a person absorbing something they had been waiting a long time to hear. "I've been waiting for someone to call for 4 years, Dorothy said. Her voice was graveled and steady, the voice of a woman who had also been through things and had not been softened by them. "I'm sorry it took this long," Edna said. "Where are you exactly in the process?" "Filing with the Attorney General's office within the week. I need testimony about the pattern, how the acquisition was presented to you, what you were told, what actually happened." "I have documents," Dorothy said. "I kept everything. My daughter thought I was being obsessive. I told her I was being careful." "You were right," Edna said. "Can you get to Flagstaff?" "I have a car," Dorothy said. "I am 81, not incapacitated." "Thursday," Edna said. "I will make lunch." On Thursday morning, Holt appeared at her door at 9 o'clock. "I am not interfering," he said. Rex needs a report on what we have from the recorder's office contact, and I volunteered to deliver it in person. He held up a folder. Also, I brought eggs from the co-op. She looked at him. He was wearing cleaner clothes than usual, which she noticed without commenting on. His color was genuinely better than it had been 2 weeks ago. He had the look of a man who had slept adequately and eaten regularly, which was different from his look the morning she had found him on the gravel. "Come in," she said. He set the eggs on the counter and sat down and told her the folder. She read it at the table while he made himself useful by washing the breakfast dishes she had left, which he did without asking permission, which she appreciated in the specific way she appreciated people who understood that help offered without fanfare was more valuable than help announced. The recorder's office contact had documented 3 instances of unusual processing speed on Strickland's subsidiary filings, cross-referenced with dates of a known meeting between the recorder's office director and a Strickland-affiliated lobbyist. Not proof exactly, but a pattern that an oversight board would find worth examining. "This goes to Sandra today," Edna said. "I figured." He dried his hands on the dish towel. "Dorothy Keller gets here at noon." She said noon, yes. Edna looked at him. "You do not need to be here for that." "I know." He sat back down at the table. "Rex wants someone present in case she needs anything. Transportation, documentation, help, whatever. I told him I would stay available." She looked at him across the table for a moment with the particular assessment she had applied to patients over 32 years. "You have been here every other day for 2 weeks, she said. "Yes." "That is not all about Rex's instructions." He did not answer immediately. He looked at the table at his hands, then out the small kitchen window at the porch where Roy's roses were showing their last red blooms before the winter set in. "My mother lived alone," he said finally, "after my dad died. She was in Idaho and I was on the road, and I told myself she was fine because she said she was fine." He paused. "She was not always fine. She just did not want to trouble me. By the time I understood that I had missed a lot of mornings." He looked at Edna. "You are not my mother, I know that. But you are a woman alone who has taken on a significant thing, and I find that I want to be near enough to be useful, even when you do not need me." Edna was quiet. "That is an honest answer," she said. "I am working on honesty as a practice," he said. "It is slower than my usual approach." "It is better, though," she said. She got up and refilled her coffee, and she refilled his as well without asking, and she sat back down. "The photograph of Tyler, have you done anything about it?" The pause. "I drafted a message," he said. "I deleted it." "You drafted it," she said. "That is further than you were 2 weeks ago." "It felt inadequate," he said. "After 6 years, a text message seems—" "Holt," she said, and her voice had the quiet precision of someone who had spent 3 decades saying important things in small rooms to people who needed to hear them. "The medium is not the message. The message is the message. Write it plainly. Send it. What he does with it is his part. Your part is sending it." He looked at her. "You are harder than you look," he said. "I look exactly as hard as I am," she said. "Now drink your coffee." Dorothy Keller arrived at noon in a cream-colored Buick that had clearly been detailed that morning. She was 81, small-boned, with white hair cut short and practical, and eyes that were sharply, almost aggressively awake. She walked up the porch steps without using the railing, which Edna noticed and respected. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them, because Holt was unobtrusive in the way that large men occasionally managed to be occupying the corner of the room without inserting himself into the conversation. And Edna served the lunch she had made, and Dorothy Keller unpacked from her canvas bag a manila folder that was by its thickness, the documentation of several years of patient and deliberate attention. "Walk me through it," Edna said. Dorothy walked her through it. She was clear and sequential and thorough, with the same characteristic Edna recognized from her own approach, the habit of a person who had anticipated not being believed and had therefore made the record irrefutable. She had the original notice from 2019, the follow-up letters with their escalating language, the timeline of pressure that had come in waves first, the legal notices, then the visits from company representatives, then the small harassments that were designed to feel accidental, then the utility disruptions that were identical in method to what Edna had experienced. "The supervisor at the Williams Town Hall," Dorothy said, tapping a page of her log, "he told me in March of 2019 that the ownership claim was routine and that there was nothing to be done. 2 months later, I found out he had received a community development grant from a foundation with a Strickland family trustee on its board." She looked at Edna. "I filed a complaint. Nothing happened." "It will happen now," Edna said. Dorothy looked at her steadily across the table. You believe that, Dorothy said. Not a question, an assessment. She was measuring something the way you measured something when you had been disappointed many times and had learned to look carefully before you trusted. I do not do things I do not believe in, Edna said. I have looked at what we have. I have talked to the attorney. We have a pattern that crosses county lines in a 4-year timeline. We have utility tampering on camera. We have recorder's office irregularities documented by an internal source. And we have 2 women in their 70s and 80s who are prepared to sit in a courtroom and say exactly what happened to them. She looked back at Dorothy with the same steadiness. Yes, I believe it. Dorothy Keller looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the wind against the porch and the distant bark of a tio somewhere in the park. Then Dorothy did something that surprised Edna slightly. She reached across the table and put her hand over Edna's. 4 years, Dorothy said, since I watched those families drive away with everything they owned in their cars. She paused. I thought no one was going to come. I am not coming to rescue you, Edna said gently. You rescued yourself 4 years ago when you kept the documents. I am just the one who called. Dorothy looked at her a moment longer. Then she squeezed Edna's hand and let go and picked up her folder. Then let us get to work, Dorothy said. Sandra Locke filed with the Attorney General's office on a Friday morning. Edna was not in Sandra's office when the filing went through. She was at the park because Herbert Watts's furnace had gone out overnight. It was early November and the mornings were near freezing, and she had called the park's maintenance company and then sat with Herbert in Trailer 4, drinking tea while they waited for the repair. Because Herbert was 81, and the cold had rattled him in a way that went beyond the physical, and he needed someone to sit with him. Rex called her at 11. Filed, he said. Sandra submitted the full package, pattern documentation, the Keller materials, the camera footage, the recorder's office records. The Attorney General's office confirmed receipt and assigned it to their Consumer Protection Division. Timeline, she said. Sandra's best estimate is 8 to 12 weeks for an initial assessment. If they move forward, a formal investigation takes longer. A pause. But here is the thing, Edna. The filing is now a matter of public record. The paper, she said. Already called me, Rex said. The reporter on the county beat, he wants to talk to you. She thought for a moment. Tell him I will meet him tomorrow at the diner on Humphrey's not here. I do not want camera trucks in the lot while this is still pending. Done, Rex said. How are you holding up? I'm having tea with Herbert, she said. I am fine. She met with the reporter, a young man named Garrett, careful and specific in his questions, which she appreciated for 2 hours the following morning at the diner on Humphrey Street. She ordered coffee. He ordered coffee. The diner was quiet on a Saturday morning in November, the booths mostly empty, the windows fogged at their lower edges with the temperature differential between inside and out. How was a good interviewer? He asked about the documents before he asked about her, which was the right order. He asked her to walk him through the ownership chain without prompting, just to see if she could do it without the papers in front of her. She could. He wrote quickly in a narrow notebook and occasionally recorded with a small device he set on the table between them. Were you afraid? He asked near the end. She considered the question, the way she considered most questions, with the intention of answering it accurately rather than impressively. I have buried a husband and a son, she said. Fear recalibrates after that. What I felt was something more like purpose. The situation required attention, and I was the one who could pay it. He published the story 4 days later. It was careful and thorough, and it contained a phrase that Sandra told her later was specifically significant, a filing with the state attorney general's office that documents what advocates describe as a systematic pattern of predatory property acquisition affecting hundreds of Arizona families over more than 5 years. The phrase hundreds of Arizona families was the lever. By the following week, 2 other families from Williams who had read the story had contacted Sandra. A former resident of the Cottonwood Park reached out to Dorothy directly through a friend of a friend with additional documentation that reinforced the pattern in a 3rd county. The Flagstaff paper story was picked up by the Phoenix paper and then by the wire service, where it moved through the network of regional outlets that covered Arizona development issues. Wade Strickland stopped responding to Sandra's communications. Curtis Strickland, who had been subject to an ongoing property crimes investigation by the Flagstaff Police Department, since Edna had submitted the camera footage, was charged formally on a Wednesday criminal damage to property utility, tampering trespass. His arraignment was set for 6 weeks out. On Thursday, Wade Strickland's attorney contacted Sandra and indicated that his client was prepared to discuss withdrawal of the ownership claim. The meeting happened in Sandra's office in Flagstaff, not in Wade's. That was Sandra's condition, and she had held it firmly, which Edna had noted with approval. Edna attended, Dorothy drove up from Williams and attended, Rex attended, sitting against the wall with his arms folded and saying nothing, which was its own kind of considerable communication about what the room represented and who it represented. Wade Strickland entered the conference room, looking like a man who had recalculated every figure available to him and found the math irreparably unworkable. His attorney did most of the talking, which was the attorney's job and which Edna respected as a function, even when she found its applications frustrating. The attorney was skillful, and she gave him credit for that. He was working with diminished materials, and he was doing the best anyone could do with them. The negotiation took 90 minutes. The terms full withdrawal of the Crestline ownership claimed to be filed with the Coconino County Recorder's Office within 15 business days. Full remediation costs for the utility damage done on the night of the 15th to be paid within 30 days to the park's utility management account. A no-contact provision protecting all residents of Crestline Mobile Estates from any communication by Strickland Development, LLC, or its affiliates. A structured settlement that included a fund for affordable housing advocacy in Coconino County, which Sandra had proposed during the third round of discussion, and which Wade's attorney had resisted for 20 minutes before accepting. The pattern documentation, the Attorney General filing, and Dorothy Keller's materials remained active and entirely outside the scope of the settlement. That was not part of the negotiation. Sandra had been explicit about that from the beginning, and Edna had backed her on it without hesitation. The settlement covered Crestline. The Attorney General investigation covered the rest, and the rest was larger and more consequential and would follow its own timeline, independent of whatever Wade Strickland signed today. Edna read the final document line by line, which she did sitting at the conference table in Sandra's office in the particular careful way she had read medical charts for 32 years. Not quickly, not performatively, but with the genuine intention of understanding every word before she accepted what it said. She signed it. Dorothy signed the supplementary witness statement. Wade Strickland signed across from her. He did not look at her while he signed, which was a small thing, but which she noticed. He was a man who had been very good at a particular thing for a long time, and the thing had stopped working, and the accounting of that was happening somewhere in him as the pen moved across the page. She did not feel satisfaction watching him sign. She felt the specific quality of exhaustion that came after a long effort completed, not hollow, not triumphant, just the particular tiredness of a thing done all the way through. His attorney gathered the papers, and they left. In the hallway outside Sandra's office, Dorothy Keller put her arms around Edna without warning, which was something Edna had not expected. Dorothy was small, but she held on with the firmness of someone who had been waiting 4 years to do exactly this. "Thank you for calling," Dorothy said. "Thank you for keeping the documents," Edna said. They stood in the hallway for a moment, in the particular light of a late November afternoon, two women who had done something no one had expected them to do, standing at the end of one thing and the beginning of whatever came after it. Sandra came out of her office and looked at them both. "The Attorney General's office called this morning," she said, "before the meeting. They are moving forward with formal investigation. Pattern and practice across 3 counties is sufficient to open a full inquiry." She looked at Edna. 12 to 18 months before it resolves, but it is moving. Edna nodded. "Good," she said. The barbecue was Rex's idea, though he presented it as a club decision, which it probably was because things that came from Rex tended to arrive already shaped by consensus. They held it on a Saturday in the 3rd week of November, which was cold for an outdoor gathering in Flagstaff, but manageable if you built a sufficient fire and brought the right quantity of food. Rex had communicated both of these requirements to the appropriate people because when Edna came out of her trailer at noon, she found 34 men and their assorted associates setting up folding tables and a full quart of firewood and a quantity of food that seemed optimistic for the number of people present and turned out to be approximately right. Herbert Watts came out of Trailer 4 and stood on his porch watching with an expression that had traveled a significant distance from where it had started 6 weeks ago. He watched for about 5 minutes and then walked carefully down his steps and across the gravel and took a paper plate from the stack someone had set up near the fire, and that was that. The Garfield family from Trailer 12 brought their 3 kids who immediately attached themselves to several of the larger bikers with the particular gravitational certainty of small children who had not yet learned to be afraid of people who looked different from what they knew. The kids tried to explain a game involving throwing gravel into a bucket. Two of the men crouched down to get the rules right. The kids corrected them several times. Dorothy had driven up from Williams for the day. She was near the fire talking to two of the club members with the animated confidence of a woman who had waited 4 years to be in a room where her experience counted for something and was not wasting the opportunity. A few other residents drifted out from their trailers cautiously at first, and then with more ease as the afternoon moved forward, and it became clear that the gathering was what it appeared to be people who had been through something together acknowledging it. Edna stood on her east porch and watched it happen. Holt came to stand beside her. He had his own coffee. He stood comfortably, the way he stood when he was not trying to communicate anything except that he was there. The Attorney General's office called Sandra yesterday, he said. They are moving forward with formal investigation. She says 12 to 18 months before anything resolves, but the filing is solid. I know, Edna said. Sandra called me too. A comfortable pause. Curtis's arraignment is in 3 weeks, he said. I know. Another pause. In the yard below them, the fire sent up a column of orange light into the gray November sky. The smell of it moved through the cold air, wood smoke and juniper. I sent Tyler a message, Holt said. She looked at him. Day before yesterday, he said. It was not long. I told him I knew I had not been the father he needed me to be, and that I was not asking for anything. I just wanted him to know I was thinking about him. He looked out at the lot at Herbert Watts standing near the fire, with a plate in his hand, talking to someone with the ease of a man who had not expected his afternoon to go this direction, and was finding that the direction suited him. He has not answered yet. He might not, she said. I know. He might, she said. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the fire, but his attention was somewhere else. I have been thinking about what you said, about the difference between carrying something and doing something about it. He looked at her. I am trying to do something about it, even if it does not work. That is the right approach, she said. You have had a lot of practice at it, he said. Doing the right thing even when you do not know how it is going to come out. She looked out at the lot, at the tables, at the children running between the motorcycles while their parents called after them without real urgency, at Dorothy near the fire gesturing at something with the hand that was not holding her coffee. Roy used to say, Edna said that courage was mostly just stubbornness wearing a better coat. She drank her coffee. He was right about that too. Holt made a sound that was as close as he usually got to a laugh. Not quite there, but close enough. They stood on the porch in the November cold, and below them, Crestline Mobile Estates, filled with the noise of a gathering and the light of a fire, and the particular warmth of people who had come through something together and were allowing themselves with appropriate care to acknowledge it. After a while, Rex came to the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at her. Edna, he said, you coming down? She looked at him. She looked at the tables and the fire and the people who had come from different places and landed here on a cold Saturday in November because of a series of choices that had started with a woman sitting on the gravel next to a stranger and deciding that this was the moment that required staying. In a minute, she said. Rex nodded and went back. She finished her coffee. She looked at Danny's photograph through the kitchen window, still in its place on the refrigerator, pinned at the corner with a tack, because some things required that kind of care. The photograph caught the light coming through the window at this time of afternoon, and for a moment the face in it was very clear. She thought about 27 years old in Kandahar province, and a flag folded into a triangle and the particular weight of a thing you carried forward with you, not because you had chosen to, but because it was part of you now, and the carrying was what love looked like after the person was gone. She thought about Roy in the chair by the east porch window in the last year, the chair position so he could see the mountains watching the light change across them through the afternoon. She thought about 32 years of emergencies of hands on wrists and voices, saying steady of the particular discipline of paying attention when attention was the only thing you had to offer. She set down her mug. She went down the steps. The gravel crunched under her walking shoes. The fire was warm from several feet away, the kind of warmth that you move toward without deciding to. Herbert Watts was laughing at something on the other side of it, a sound she was not sure she had heard from him before, full and genuine. The laugh of a man who had been given back something he had assumed was permanently gone. Dorothy Keller found her at the edge of the gathering and handed her a plate. Eat something, Dorothy said. You look like you have been working since sunrise. I have, Edna said. I always have. Then eat, Dorothy said with the firmness of a woman who had driven 2 hours to be here and was not going to watch anyone stand at a party without a plate. Edna took the plate. She stood by the fire with Dorothy and she ate, and the fire was warm against the cold. And above the San Francisco peaks, the sky was moving toward the particular deep blue of late November that was almost difficult to look at directly. It was so clear and so far. Holt came over after a while and stood on her other side without saying anything. Rex joined them. The four of them stood by the fire in the particular silence of people who had arrived at the end of something long and had not yet decided what to call the thing that came after. The smoke went up straight in the still air. The mountains stood where they had always stood. Edna held her plate and looked out at the 23 trailers of Crestline Mobile Estates, the lights coming on in the windows. As the afternoon light dropped the ordinary life of people who had kept their homes and would wake up tomorrow in them. She thought about the 6 weeks of documents on the kitchen table. She thought about the morning on the gravel and the man who had not died because she had been awake at 5:30 and paying attention. She thought about all the mornings she had been awake and paying attention that had not led to anything visible. All the quiet accumulation of choices that did not announce themselves as courage at the time. She thought about the fact that she was 74 years old and standing by a fire in November with a plate of food and people around her, and that this was a good thing, and that she knew it was a good thing, and that knowing it without complication was itself something she had had to work toward. It was enough. Not everything, but enough. That was the honest accounting of it. She ate her food by the fire, and the evening came down around Crestline Mobile Estates, and the mountains held the last light of the day on their ridgelines for a long time before it finally gradually was gone. The week after the settlement, signing the park was quieter than usual, in a specific way. Not the quiet of tension, which had a particular texture Edna had learned to recognize over the past 6 weeks, a hell-breath quality that preceded something, but the quiet of aftermath, the quiet of people exhaling. She noticed it on Monday morning when she walked her 3 laps in 3 of the trailers that had kept their blinds drawn for weeks, had them open to the light. She noticed it when the Garfield children played in the common area in the late afternoon without their mother calling them in after 20 minutes. She noticed it when Herbert Watts walked to the mailbox at his usual pace, a pace he had slowed considerably during the worst of it, as though he were conserving something, and walked back without looking over his shoulder. She noticed these things and did not remark on them because the appropriate response to a return to ordinary life was to let it be ordinary. Sandra called on Tuesday with an update on the remediation timeline. The utility company had sent an inspector on Monday morning, documented the damage to the junction box and the contamination of the well standpipe, and issued Strickland Development a repair mandate with a 15-day compliance window. Sandra had received confirmation that the attorneys were coordinating. The recorder's office filed the withdrawal yesterday, Sandra said. It is on the books. The ownership claim is gone. Good, Edna said. I want you to know, Sandra said, that I have been doing land use law for 11 years, and this is the fastest I have ever seen a situation of this complexity move from first filing to resolution. The evidence was well organized, Edna said. A brief pause on Sandra's end. Edna, Sandra said, I am trying to pay you a compliment. I know, Edna said, and I appreciate it. But the evidence was well organized. That is what mattered. She heard Sandra laugh, which was a sound she had not heard from the attorney before. It was a good sound. On Wednesday, Rex stopped by with 2 of his riders to finalize the utility remediation monitoring. He had offered through channels that did not require her to ask to have someone from the club present when the contractors came to do the repair work, on the theory that work performed under observation tended to be performed more thoroughly. Edna had agreed to this without discussing it at length because it was simply a sensible approach. The contractors came on Thursday. There were 4 of them, and they worked for 3 hours, and the junction box was restored, and the well standpipe was flushed and resealed. And one of Rex's riders, who had apparently spent time in construction before the road, stood near enough to watch the work without crowding it, occasionally asking questions in the specific technical language of someone who knew what the right answers were supposed to sound like. The work was thorough. After the contractors left, Edna made tea and sat on the east porch. The November afternoon was cold but windless, and the sun was at an angle that made the south-facing concrete warm enough to be pleasant if you were dressed for it. She had her heavy cardigan and her old wool blanket that she kept folded over the porch chair. She was thinking about the Attorney General's investigation, which was the piece of this that was not finished and would not be finished for many months. She was thinking about the families in Williams and Sedona and Cottonwood who had already left their parks, for whom the resolution she had reached at Crestline would not restore what they had lost. The Pinon Ridge site was a storage facility now. 83 families. You could not undo that. What you could do was what Sandra had said, pattern and practice across 3 counties, submitted to a state-level office with the authority to investigate and act. What you could do was make the next park harder to take. And the one after that. It was not enough. It was what was available. She heard the motorcycle before she saw it, the familiar sound of Holt's borrowed bike. His own was back from the shop now he had mentioned, but he was continuing to use the smaller one while he was coming this direction, which she suspected had more to do with parking it on the access road without blocking the lot than with any mechanical consideration. He came around the corner of the trailer and saw her on the porch and stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Am I interrupting?" he said. "No," she said. "There is tea." I went inside and came back with a mug and sat in the other porch chair, the one that did not have the blanket, which he did not seem to mind. Tyler responded, he said. She looked at him. "This morning," he said, one sentence. He looked at the mug in his hands. He said, "I did not know you still thought about me." Edna was quiet. "That was what he said," Holt repeated. "Not yes, not no, not go away, just that." He looked at the mountains. "I did not know what to write back. I sat with the phone for an hour." "What did you write?" "I wrote, 'I think about you every day I have for 29 years. He paused. "Then I sent it before I could delete it again. And nothing yet. It has only been this morning." He was quiet for a moment. But he wrote back. After 6 years, he wrote one sentence. "One sentence is enough to start with," Edna said. "I know." He drank his tea. It was quiet on the porch, the particular quiet of 2 people who did not feel the need to fill the space between words. "You did that," he said. "No," she said. "You did that. I just told you that not sending it was also a choice." "Same thing," he said. "It is not the same thing," she said, "but I will let it go." He almost smiled again. The almost smile that she had begun to read as his version of something more complete. The sun moved across the concrete of the porch, and the shadows of the juniper along the back fence stretched long, and the afternoon went about its business. After a while, Herbert Watts came out of Trailer 4 and walked across the lot toward the mailbox, and on the way back waved up at the porch. Edna waved back. Herbert shook his head at the sight of Holt in the chair, but in a way that communicated something that was not disapproval. "Hi is getting used to it," Edna said. "He thinks I am courting you," Holt said. Edna looked at him. "He told me last week," Holt said. "He pulled me aside when you were inside and told me that if I was here with intentions, I should say so plainly, because you were not a woman who had patience for indirectness." "Herbert Watts," Edna said with a very particular tone. "I is not wrong about the indirectness," Holt said. She looked at him for a moment across the porch. Then she looked back at the mountains. "I am 74 years old," she said. "I buried my husband and my son, and I have lived alone for 8 years, and I have my routines, and I have my work, and I am content with my life as it is." "I know," he said. "And I am also not entirely sure that content is the same as complete," she said more quietly. "But I am not prepared to examine that thought at present." "That is fair," he said. "It is also not a conversation for a porch in November," she said. "Also fair," he said. They sat on the porch with their tea, and the afternoon went toward evening, and neither of them said anything more about it. And the not saying was itself something that had a shape to it, the shape of a door left slightly open rather than closed. The arraignment for Curtis Strickland was on a Tuesday morning in December. Edna did not attend. She had given her statement to the Property Crimes Unit 3 weeks earlier, a detailed and methodical account with the camera footage as supporting documentation, and her presence in the courtroom on arraignment day would not add anything material to the proceeding. She understood this and accepted it without sentiment. The criminal process would do what it would do on its own timeline. What she did on that Tuesday morning was walk her 3 laps of the perimeter road and come back inside and have her second cup of coffee and work on the crossword for 45 minutes and then spend 2 hours at the kitchen table writing a letter. The letter was to the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, addressed to the investigator assigned to the Strickland case whose name she had obtained through Sandra. It was a supplementary document organized as a timeline with cross-references to the previously submitted evidence, incorporating additional context she had assembled in the weeks since the original filing. It was specific and sourced, and it identified 3 additional procedural anomalies she had noticed in reviewing the county records a second time. She printed it, signed it, put it in an envelope, and drove to the post office. On the way back, she stopped at the co-op because she needed rosemary, and because the winter rosemary at the co-op was better than what she could keep alive in the cold months. And she stood in the produce section for a few minutes, looking at the herbs and feeling unexpectedly the particular lightness of someone who has put down something heavy and has not yet picked up the next thing. It was a Tuesday morning in December, and she was in the produce section of a co-op, and there was nothing pressing requiring her attention, and she had done what needed doing, and the morning was simply a morning. She bought the rosemary and 2 other things she had not planned to buy and drove home. Sandra called that afternoon. The arraignment had gone as expected. Curtis Strickland had entered a not guilty plea through his attorney, which was procedural. The trial date was set for early spring. The prosecution had the footage, the incident report, and 2 witnesses, including the park manager, who had finally agreed to provide a statement, and Sandra's assessment, offered cautiously, was that the evidentiary situation was not favorable for the defense. The father, Edna said, "What is his status?" "His attorney is in communication with the Attorney General's office," Sandra said. "There has been no formal charge yet, but the investigation is active. They have his financial records under review." A pause. "The Williams Town Hall supervisor who received the grant, he was interviewed last week." Sandra had a contact who knew someone adjacent to the investigation. It was moving. "Good," Edna said. She made dinner lentil soup, the kind that took 40 minutes and made the trailer smell like something worth coming home to, and ate it at the kitchen table with a newspaper and the tail end of the crossword she had not finished in the morning. She washed the pot. She went to bed at 10:30. She slept well. The week before Christmas, Holt came by on a morning when the first real snow of the season was sitting on the San Francisco peaks in a way that made the mountain look like it had been redrawn from scratch. He brought a small pine wreath from the nursery outside town because he had been driving past it and seen them stacked by the road, and it seemed like the right thing for a porch. He was not entirely sure it was the right thing. He knocked on the door with the wreath under one arm. She looked at the wreath. "It is a wreath," he said. "I can see that," she said. "Come in." She made him hang it on the inside of the east porch door because the outside hook was loose and she had not gotten around to fixing it. He fixed the hook while he was at it, which required a screwdriver from the small toolbox under her kitchen sink that he located without asking where it was, which she noted as evidence of enough time spent in a space to know its geography. She made coffee. He sat in Roy's chair. "Tyler called," he said, "last night. We talked for 45 minutes. She looked at him. "He called," Holt said. "Not texted, called. I almost did not answer because I did not recognize the number. He has a new phone." A pause. "He wanted to know if I was all right. He said he had seen something online about a situation with some bikers in Flagstaff in a trailer park and an old woman who had apparently taken on a real estate developer, and he thought maybe I was involved." "An old woman," Edna said. "The article called you a retired nurse and community advocate," Holt said. "Tyler said, 'Dad, are you the biker in that story?' I said yes. He said, 'Are you all right?' I said yes. And then you talked for 45 minutes, she said. And then we talked for 45 minutes. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. He sounds like a grown man, which I knew because he is 29, but knowing it and hearing it are different things. They are, she agreed. I wants to meet, Holt said, after the holidays. Phoenix probably because that is where he is. He said it did not have to be a big thing. Coffee, maybe. Coffee is a very good starting place, Edna said. It is a terrifying starting place, he said. Yes, she said, and also a good one. He looked at his mug, then at the window, then at her. You know, he said, when I was on the ground on that access road when the glucose was starting to work and I was coming back up, the first thing I saw clearly was your face. I did not know who you were or where I was. I just knew someone had stayed. She was quiet. I've been thinking about that, he said, about what it means to stay when most people leave. Some people leave because they need to, she said carefully, and some because they do not know they had a choice. I knew I had a choice, he said. When Tyler was 12 and his mother was asking me to stay and choose differently, I knew. You are 58, she said. You have 20 or 30 years left if you take care of yourself, which requires seeing an endocrinologist, which we have discussed. We have discussed it, he agreed. That is a long time to be the person who stays, she said. If you want to be. He looked at her. Is that what you are offering? He said. Permission. She thought about it. No, she said. I am observing that the arithmetic is in your favor if you want to use it well. What you do with the arithmetic is your own. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone accepting the terms of an honest thing. Outside, the snow on peaks caught the winter light, and the whole mountain was bright with it, the kind of bright that made you feel the cold as a clean thing rather than a hostile one. A clean cold with a bright mountain behind it, and a wreath on the door, and coffee in the kitchen. In the lot below, Herbert Watts came out of Trailer 4 with a small artificial Christmas wreath under his arm, looking at it with the expression of a man who was not sure whether he was doing this because he wanted to or because it was expected and had decided it did not matter. He put it on his door. He stood back and looked at it. He went inside. Edna watched this and felt the warmth of it in the specific way she had learned to let good small things matter. The last days of the year settled over Crestline Mobile Estates with the particular quiet of a place that has come through something and knows it. The utilities worked. The lights were on in all 23 trailers. The access road was clear of debris. The Garfield children were out in the common area on the day before Christmas Eve building something out of the light snow that had come overnight. Something that started as a snowman and evolved through committee into something more ambitious and architecturally unstable, but deeply satisfying to its builders. Edna brought them hot chocolate in paper cups, which she had made in the batch, because the Garfield parents were both working afternoon shifts, and the children were being supervised by a neighbor from Trailer 9 who had her hands full and appreciated reinforcement. The children drank the hot chocolate very fast and went back to their construction project. Edna stood for a few minutes and watched it. The thing they were building collapsed. They rebuilt it. It collapsed again. One of them, the youngest, sat down in the snow and looked at the ruins with an expression of pure philosophical confrontation with impermanence. And then her brother said something to her, and she got up and they started building again. Edna walked back to her trailer. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the documents that were no longer spread across it. She had filed them in the green accordion folder that now lived in the cabinet under the television. And she looked at the clear table surface, wood-worn smooth at the edges by years of meals and coffee cups and crosswords and the placement of hands. She looked at Danny's photograph, at the wedding picture, at Roy's mug on the shelf where she kept it, not in the cabinet with the other mugs, but on the shelf where she could see it. She thought about 19 years in this trailer, which had started as a temporary arrangement and had become a life. She thought about the 11 pots on the porches and the 3 laps of the perimeter road every morning, and the crossword and the coffee and the routines that had been for 8 years the structure inside which grief and ordinary existence had learned to coexist. She thought about 6 weeks of documents on the kitchen table and a man on gravel at the end of an access road and 34 motorcycles in the lot and Dorothy Keller's hand over hers. She thought about Herbert Watts walking to the mailbox without looking over his shoulder. She picked up her notebook and wrote the date at the top of a fresh page, which was something she'd always did when she was beginning a new accounting of something. Then she wrote in her precise handwriting 3 things. The Attorney General's investigation is active. Curtis Strickland's trial is set for spring. The park is intact. She looked at those 3 lines. Then she wrote a 4th. Tyler Carver called his father. She closed the notebook. It was not everything. It was not even most things measured against the scale of what had been damaged and what could not be restored. The families who had already left their parks. The town hall supervisor who had taken a grant and looked the other way. The institutional structures that had allowed a man like Wade Strickland to operate across 3 counties for 5 years before anyone with the authority to stop him was made to look at what he had done. Those things were still there. The investigation would address some of them. The trial would address one of them. The rest would remain the way most of the damage in the world remained, waiting for the next person who was awake at 5:30 and paying attention. She was 74 years old. She had her routines. Coffee in the window, in the walk, in the crossword, in the watering, in the particular morning quiet that was hers alone, and was now also the quiet of a place where the lights were on, and the utilities worked, and the children built things in the snow. She would be awake tomorrow at 5:30. She would pay attention. That was the honest accounting of what she had and what she would do with it, and she found that it was enough. Not everything. Enough. She made her 2nd cup of coffee, one more than she normally allowed herself, because it was nearly New Year's, and her knees ached, and the mountains were bright with snow, And Roy had always said that there were days that earned an extra cup, and she took it to the east porch, and she sat in her chair with the wool blanket over her lap, and she watched the light on the San Francisco peaks in the last days of the year. The snow on the ridgelines was very white against the deep blue sky. The coyote was talking somewhere beyond the back fence, the same short declarative bark she had been hearing on these mornings for 19 years. The sound of something that knew exactly where it was and had found what it was looking for. She sat on her porch. She drank her coffee. She was there and it was enough. January came in hard, the way January came into Flagstaff when it meant business. Not the gentle cold of December, but the serious cold. The kind that had weight and intention that got into the gaps between things. The pipes under Trailer 7, which had survived 17 winters without complaint, chose this January to develop a slow drip behind the kitchen cabinet that Edna discovered on a Tuesday morning when she reached under the sink for the dish soap and her hand came back wet. She called the park maintenance line and was told the earliest available appointment was Thursday, which was 2 days away. She put a pot under the drip, which she emptied twice that first day and 3 times the second day, and she adjusted her movements through the kitchen accordingly, the way she had adjusted her movements through difficult situations her entire adult life by noticing the new constraint and working within it. Holt found out on Wednesday because he stopped by as he had been stopping by 2 or 3 mornings a week since the settlement, with no particular agenda beyond coffee and whatever needed doing. She did not tell him about the pipe. He found out because he went under the sink for the dish soap himself in the same automatic way. He had developed the habit of doing the dishes without being asked, and his hand came back wet, and he looked at the pot. How long, he said. Since Tuesday, she said. Edna, he said. It is manageable, she said. I have a pot. You have a pot, he said with the tone of someone who wanted to say several more things but was exercising restraint. The maintenance appointment is tomorrow, she said. He looked under the sink for a moment, assessing. He was not a plumber. She knew he was a welder by original trade, or had been, which meant he understood how metal behaved and how joints failed, and how the difference between a small problem and a catastrophic one was usually time. He looked at the drip and at the connection and at how much time they might or might not have. I can fix that today, he said. You do not need to fix it today, she said. The appointment is tomorrow. Edna, he said again. The appointment is tomorrow, she said firmly. I have a pot. I am managing. She paused. But if you want to stay for coffee and look at it again after, I will not object to a second opinion. He stayed. He looked at it again after coffee. He went to the hardware store. She heard his motorcycle and then heard it come back 20 minutes later. And he fixed the drip in 40 minutes with a part that cost $6. And when the maintenance crew came Thursday morning, there was nothing for them to do, and they seemed mildly affronted by this. She paid the service call fee anyway because she had made the appointment, and keeping appointments was a principle. You are the most stubborn person I have met in 58 years of meeting people, Holt said. Roy said the same thing, she said. He said it fondly. I'm saying it fondly, he said. She looked at him across the kitchen. I know, she said. The winter continued. The Attorney General's investigation continued invisibly to Edna, except for the occasional call from Sandra, with an update documents, requested interviews scheduled, a preliminary report anticipated sometime in the late spring. The criminal case against Curtis Strickland moved through its pretrial process with the deliberate pace of the legal system, which was not fast, but, was Sandra said, moving in the right direction. The remediation of the utility systems had been completed before Christmas, certified by an independent inspector that Sandra had required as a condition of the settlement, and the park's shared infrastructure was in better shape than it had been before the damage, because the repair had caught and corrected a secondary issue with the junction box that had been developing for years. Edna noted this without irony. Wade Strickland's campaign of harassment had, among its unintended consequences, resulted in better electrical service for 23 trailers in Crestline Mobile Estates. The world was imprecise in its accountings. She wrote to Dorothy Keller regularly, actual letters handwritten, because Dorothy had mentioned in their third phone call that she still checked her mailbox every day out of habit, even though the mail had become mostly advertisements and bills, and Edna understood exactly what that meant and what to do about it. Dorothy wrote back with the same frequency, her handwriting a different style, but the same quality of attention, precise full sentences, no wasted words. Dorothy was dealing with her own situation in Williams, A landlord who was increasingly slow with repairs and quick with rent increases, and a lease that was month to month in a way that did not provide much security. Edna had passed this information to Sandra in a context that was not a case but was an observation about a pattern, and Sandra had passed it to a tenant advocacy organization in Prescott that did this kind of work across the region. And Dorothy had received a call from them in early February that she had described in her next letter as unexpectedly useful. The letters went back and forth through January and February with the regularity of a thing that had found its rhythm. Dorothy wrote about Williams in the cold there in the storage facility that had replaced Pinon Ridge, which she drove past sometimes on her way to the grocery store, and which she described with a particular economy of language that communicated everything she felt about it without requiring elaboration. Edna wrote about Crestline and the crossword and the roses on the east porch that she was nursing through the winter and the Attorney General's investigation and Holt's visits, and Herbert Watts, who had begun with the careful tentativeness of a man rediscovering a habit he had let lapse to take his afternoon walk again around the perimeter road. She did not write about Holt in ways that required interpretation. She wrote about him in the same way she wrote about everything, with precision and without excess. Dorothy, who was 81 and had been married to the same man for 53 years before he died, and who had therefore developed a comprehensive understanding of how people arrange information to protect themselves, wrote back in February, "I notice you have mentioned Holt in 6 of the 8 letters you have written me, and that you describe his visits the way you describe the weather, as though they are simply part of the conditions of a day. This is a very specific kind of indirectness from a woman who is otherwise not indirect. I'm not asking, I am observing." Edna read this letter on a Thursday morning in February, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee. She wrote back that same afternoon, "You are a perceptive woman, Dorothy." Roy was also perceptive. "I find it is a quality I undervalue until I encounter it." She did not say anything further on the subject, and Dorothy's next letter did not press it because Dorothy understood the difference between an observation and an interrogation. March arrived. The last snow of the season fell on a Tuesday, 3 inches overnight, and the park in the morning was white and still, and the mountains were buried to their lower slopes in a way that made the whole sky look different, wider. Edna walked her 3 laps of the perimeter road in the snow, which required more attention to footing and a slower pace, and which the aluminum walking stick was particularly useful for. Holt was at the east porch door when she came back around the corner of the trailer, standing on the top step with 2 cups of coffee, which meant he had let himself in with the key she had given him in January after the pipe incident, not as a statement about anything except that it was impractical to knock when your hands were going to be wet, and the maintenance appointment was not until Thursday. She had not taken the key back after January. She had thought about taking it back. She had thought about what keeping it meant and what returning it would mean, and she had concluded that both the keeping and the returning were meaningful acts in different directions, and that she was not prepared at present to make either one deliberately. So she had done nothing, and the key was on his key ring, and he came through the kitchen when she was not home. If something needed doing, which was an arrangement she found on honest examination, that she did not mind. She took one of the coffee cups. 3 inches, he said. Closer to 4 on the perimeter road, she said. The wind drifted it on the north side. She sat in her chair. He sat in the other one. The snow in the lot below was undisturbed except for the track of her footprints, making their 3 circuits, and the morning was very quiet. The quiet of a world muffled, and the mountains were entirely white behind a sky that was just beginning to go from gray to blue. "Tyler is coming up next weekend," Holt said. She looked at him. "I wants to see Flagstaff," he said. "He has never been. We talked about it on Sunday. He said he wanted to see where his dad spent time." A pause. "That is what he said, where his dad spent time." "That is a significant phrase," she said. "I know," he said. "I is coming to see where you are," she said. "Not just what the town looks like." "I know," he said again. She held her coffee mug and looked at the snow and thought about 29 years old and 6 years of silence in a text message that had started with, "I did not know. You still thought about me," and had somehow arrived here at a son driving up from Phoenix to see where his dad spent time. The distance between those 2 points was enormous. The getting there had been 1 message sent before it could be deleted, and 45 minutes on the phone, and 2 more calls after that, and now this. One thing after another. "He might want to meet you," Holt said carefully. "I have told him about what happened here. About you." "What did you tell him?" That a woman I know took on a corrupt real estate developer with a camera. She installed herself in 6 weeks of research and she won. He paused. And that she told me to send the text. I told you the medium was not the message, she said, which amounts to the same thing, he said. She considered arguing this and decided against it. If he wants to meet me, I will be here, she said. I am usually here. It is not a complicated situation. No, he said, it is not. The snow in the lot below was beginning to catch the morning light as the sky cleared, turning from flat white to something with dimension and shadow. The individual crystals of it catching and breaking the light into small and temporary brightness. The juniper along the back fence held the snow on their branches in the patient way that junipers held things, not clinging, just receiving. I've been thinking, Edna said, about the families in the other parks, the ones who already left. Holt waited. The Attorney General's investigation may result in penalties for Strickland and potentially in some restitution mechanism, she said. Sandra thinks it is possible, not certain. The process is what it is. She looked at the mountains. But there is a separate question of what those families have now, where they are, whether they had resources to land somewhere adequate, or whether they are in worse situations than Pinot Ridge was. You want to find out, he said. I want to understand the scope of it, she said. Not to fix it, I am realistic about what one retired nurse can do, but to understand it. And to make sure that the people doing the advocacy work, the organizations like the one Sandra connected Dorothy to have accurate information about what they are dealing with. That is research, he said. That is research, she agreed. I am good at research. I have time and I have attention and I have a library card and a reference librarian named Geraldine who has by now become genuinely invested in the outcome of this situation. Holt looked at her. You are going to do this, he said. It was not a question. I am already doing it, she said. I started last week. I have located 41 of the 83 families from Pinot Ridge through public records and community organization directories. Some of them are fine, some of them are not fine. What are you going to do with the ones who are not fine? Connect them to resources, she said. Sandra's network, the Prescott organization, the two other tenant advocacy groups I have found that operate in Yavapai and Coconino counties. She paused. And in cases where the situation is acute, if someone is in an unsafe housing situation right now because of what Strickland did, I will make calls until I find who needs to hear about it. I was quiet for a moment. Then, you are going to need help with the research. Tracking 41 families across 2 counties is a lot of work. I am aware of that, she said. I am offering what he said. She looked at him. You are not a researcher, she said. No, he said, but I can drive and I can make phone calls. And I spent 15 years running a business that required keeping track of a significant number of moving parts. A pause. And Rex has a contact who does investigative work, not the kind you need, but adjacent. He might know who to call. She thought about this with the same honesty she applied to most things. All right, she said, you can help, but you do it my way, which means thoroughly and in the right order and without cutting corners, because corners are where the important things hide. I understand thoroughness, he said. I know, she said. It was not a criticism, it was an orientation. He nodded the nod of someone accepting the terms of an honest arrangement. The coffee was getting cold. She drank the rest of hers, and he drank the rest of his, and the morning moved forward the way mornings did. One thing following another in the order, they arrived, and the snow in the lot below began to melt at its edges where the sun reached it, and the junipers shed their white burdens, gradually branch by branch, and the perimeter road became visible again, through the melt, the familiar gravel surface returning. 3 months after the barbecue on a Saturday in late February, the Iron Riders held a smaller gathering at the park. Not a production, no folding tables and stacked food, and the organized informality of a large event. Sixers, including Rex and Holt, who came in the mid-morning and parked on the access road and had coffee with Edna Mohiney on the east porch, and then walked the perimeter road once with Herbert Watts, who had apparently been corresponding with Rex by phone about the status of the utility repairs and who had opinions about the junction box that he had been waiting for an appropriate audience for. The Garfield family came out, the neighbor from Trailer 9. Two of the younger couples who had, over the months since the settlement, begun to emerge from the wariness that the situation had settled over them and engage with the fact of their neighbors as neighbors, rather than as people sharing an uncertain situation. It was not a celebration, It was something more ordinary than that, a Saturday morning in winter with coffee and cold air and people talking on a gravel lot in northern Arizona. The kind of ordinary that had been briefly in danger of becoming impossible and was now simply itself again. Rex found a moment to stand beside Edna near the east porch. The Attorney General's office called me last week, he said, direct inquiry. They wanted to verify some of the timeline in the original submission. Sandra mentioned they were following up on specifics, Edna said. They asked about the utility tampering, Rex said, specifically whether there was any communication between the park residents and the Iron Riders prior to the incident that might indicate prior knowledge. I called you after, Edna said. I told them that, Rex said. They have the phone records. He paused. They are being thorough, which means they are taking it seriously. Good, she said. He looked out at the lot at the small gathering that was not a formal event, but was what it was. You did a significant thing, he said. The families at Crestline, the investigation, Dorothy Keller having someone to talk to, the Prescott organization getting involved. He paused. That is a larger thing than what started with. It started with a man on gravel at the end of an access road, she said. Yes, he said. I went out to check on the noise, she said. That is all I did. Everything after that was just the next thing that needed doing. That is true, Rex said, and also not the full accounting of it. She looked at him. You chose to stay, he said, when Curtis Strickland was standing there. When you had every practical reason to call 911 and step back and let the system handle it, you stayed. That was a choice. It was the only sensible choice, she said. He needed care immediately. The system takes 22 minutes. Edna, Rex said with the particular patience of someone who had been listening to people define their own actions away from what they actually were for a long time. You stayed. She looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said. I stayed. He nodded. That was all he said about it. The morning went on. Holt was across the lot talking to Herbert, who had brought out his opinions about the junction box and was apparently finding in Holt a more technically sophisticated audience than he had hoped for, judging by the way his hands were moving as he talked. Rex drifted over to the Garfield children, who had discovered that his beard was the right texture for the kind of examination that required touching, and who were conducting that examination with scientific thoroughness, while he stood with the patience of a large man who had made peace with this. Edna watched all of it from the east porch. She was thinking about the 41 families she had located so far, and the 42 she had not yet found, and the call she would make on Monday, and the letter she needed to write to the Prescott organization, about 3 specific cases she had identified as requiring immediate referral. She was thinking about Tyler Carver driving up from Phoenix next weekend, and what it meant to drive somewhere to see where your father spent time, and what it meant to be the place where a person spent time. She was thinking about Roy's chair in the kitchen, and the way Holt sat in it with the settled quality of a person who knew where he was, and the key on his key ring, and the question of what it meant to keep something rather than return it. She was thinking about Danny at 27 and the flag and the particular weight of grief that became part of you rather than something separate from you, and the way ordinary life continued alongside it without contradiction. She was thinking about 32 years of nights in hospitals and the accumulated weight of attention paid to things that mattered, and the strange gift of being 74 years old in a world that mostly underestimated people who were 74 years old, and what you could do with that gift if you were paying attention. One thing after another. That was the honest accounting of a life well lived in her experience. Not a single grand gesture, but one thing after another, done in the right order, done thoroughly, done without looking away. She would be awake tomorrow at 5:30. There was always a next thing. She went inside to make more coffee. The spring arrived without announcing itself, the way spring arrived in Flagstaff. Not a dramatic transition, but a gradual one. The cold releasing its grip degree by degree over the course of weeks, the snow on the peaks receding upward toward the summits, the junipers putting out their new growth in the almost imperceptible way that slow-growing things change visibly different only if you had been watching consistently enough to notice. Edna had been watching consistently enough to notice. The trial of Curtis Strickland concluded on a Thursday in April with a guilty verdict on 2 of the 3 charges: criminal damage to property and utility tampering, and an acquittal on the trespass charge, which Sandra had anticipated because the access road question was genuinely ambiguous, and the prosecution had chosen not to make it a centerpiece. The sentencing was set for 6 weeks out. Edna received this information from Sandra by phone and accepted it with the equanimity she had applied to most developments in this process. The verdict was not everything. It was what the evidence supported properly applied. That was how the system was supposed to work, and on this occasion, it had. She called Dorothy. They convicted him, Dorothy said before Edna could say anything. How did you know already? Edna said. Sandra texted me, Dorothy said. Apparently I am on her list now. You should be on her list, Edna said. You were part of building it. A pause on the line. Dorothy was quiet in the way she was quiet when something had landed somewhere it needed to land. I watched those families drive away, Dorothy said. In November of 2019, I stood on the road in front of where Pinone Ridge used to be. The gate was already down. The company came in that fast, and I watched the last 4 cars drive out with everything they could fit in them. And I thought someone is going to answer for this. Her voice was steady. It took longer than I expected. It usually does, Edna said. But it happened, Dorothy said. It happened, Edna said. They talked for 40 minutes after that about things that were not the case about Dorothy's landlord situation, which the Prescott organization had intervened in, and which was now governed by a proper lease with a 12-month term, about the letter Dorothy had received from one of the Pinone Ridge families she had lost touch with in 2020, who had found her through the community organization and who was living in Cottonwood now, and was all right about Spring and Williams, which was coming in the same slow way it was coming in Flagstaff. After she hung up, Edna sat for a moment at the kitchen table. She thought about the 41 families she had located from Pinone Ridge, and the 31 she had eventually found from the other parks through the patient work of phone calls and public records, and the willingness to make one more call after the previous one had not connected. 72 families. Not all of them had needed intervention. Most of them were managing in the way that people who had been through difficult things managed, not without cost but forward. 11 had been connected to resources they had not known were available. 3 had been referred to legal aid for ongoing housing issues unrelated to Strickland, but that had worsened in the period of displacement. It was not everything. It was what she had been able to do with the time and attention she had applied methodically over 4 months in the kitchen of Trailer 7 in Crestline Mobile Estates, between the morning coffee and the crossword and the 3 laps of the perimeter road. Holt had helped. He had come on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings since February, and he had made phone calls and driven to the Coconino County Records office twice to retrieve documents, and he had sat at the other end of the kitchen table working through a list of addresses while she worked through a different list, and they had drunk coffee and traded information, and occasionally sat in comfortable silence while the work moved forward. Tyler had come up from Phoenix in late February as planned. He had arrived on a Saturday morning in a small gray sedan, a young man who looked like Holt around the eyes but had his mother's coloring, who shook Edna's hand with the careful gravity of someone who understood that he was in the presence of something he needed to calibrate correctly. He had stayed for 3 days. Holt had shown him Flagstaff, the downtown, the university, the Lowell Observatory, which Tyler had apparently always wanted to see, and which was in Edna's understanding of the itinerary. The reason the visit had happened in February rather than a more comfortable month, because the winter sky was best for the telescope. On the second evening, Tyler had knocked on Edna's door, while Holt was at the hardware store for something, and she had opened it, and he had stood on her porch looking at her with the particular expression of a young man who had prepared what he wanted to say and was trying to remember the right order for it. My dad told me what you said to him, Tyler said, about sending the text, about not carrying something without doing something about it. It was not complicated advice, she said. No, he said. It was not, but he needed someone to say it. He paused. Thank you for saying it. She had looked at him for a moment, 29 years old, in Holt's eyes and something of his own that was different, something that had been shaped by a different kind of growing up. And she had said, he loves you. He is not good at showing it in the conventional ways. But he has carried your photograph for 29 years. That is a particular kind of love. Tyler had nodded slowly, the nod of someone receiving information they had been ready to receive for some time but had needed to hear from a specific direction. I know, he said. I think I always knew. He had gone back across the lot to where Holt was returning from the hardware store, and the two of them had stood in the gravel, talking for a while, not long, but with the ease of two people finding the beginning of a new habit, and Edna had watched from the east porch and felt the warmth of it, without requiring that it be more than what it was. Now in April, Tyler was coming up again. A longer visit this time, 4 days, because he had taken time off from work, And because he and Holt were planning to ride the roads around Sedona, which was a thing they had apparently discussed during one of their phone calls as something they had never done together. Holt had mentioned this to Edna with the careful restraint of someone who was not going to say how much it mattered out loud, because saying it out loud might disturb its fragility. She understood this. She had understood it for a long time. The morning of Tyler's arrival, a Friday in April, clear and warming, the peaks still carrying their last snow, but the lot below green with the first ground cover. Edna was on her east porch with her coffee when Holt pulled up on his Harley, the original one, fully repaired, and returned since February. He came up the porch steps and stood next to her chair and looked out at the morning. He arrives at noon, he said. I know, she said. You told me on Wednesday. I know, he said. I am telling you again because I am nervous. She looked at him. It is all right to be nervous, she said. It means you understand what it matters. He looked at the mountains. The snow on the high ridge lines was a thin white line against the blue retreating slowly toward the summits. I have been thinking about Idaho, he said, about the years after my mother said she was fine and I believed her because I needed to. He paused. I do not want to be the kind of person who needs people to say they are fine so I can keep going. I want to be the kind of person who asks the right question. You are already asking the right questions, she said. You asked them with Tyler. You are here, which is a different kind of asking. I was quiet for a moment. Will you be all right today? He said, while I am with Tyler. Holt, she said. I know, he said. I know you are fine. I am asking anyway because that is what people who stay do. She looked at him. Yes, she said. I will be all right today. He nodded. There is soup on the stove, he said. I made it this morning. It needs another 40 minutes, but then it is ready. She looked at him. You made soup, she said. You have a standing appointment with Herbert at 3, he said. I did not want you to not eat before that because you get absorbed in the research and forget. She looked at the kitchen window where she could see the edge of the pot on the stove. There were things she was not prepared to say out loud, not yet, not precisely. There were things she was not sure how to say, or whether they needed saying, or what the saying of them would require of her. She was 74 years old, and she had her routines and her work and her clear sense of what her life contained and what it meant, and she was also not entirely sure that the accounting was as complete as it had been before October, before the access road, before the man in Roy's chair who came on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays and fixed the drip under the sink and made soup before her 3 o'clock appointment with Herbert. She was working on the accounting. She was giving it the same patient thoroughness she gave to everything. Thank you for the soup, she said. You are welcome, he said. I went back down the steps and got on his Harley and drove toward the main road, the sound of the engine carrying up through the morning air and then diminishing and then gone. She sat on the porch with her coffee and the mountains in the April morning and the smell of soup from the kitchen. Roy's roses on the east corner had put out their first buds of the season, 3 of them tight and dark red against the green, the annual proof that something could be kept alive if you were willing to fight the dry heat for it every summer year after year, because you had decided it was worth the effort. She looked at the buds. She thought about the next thing. She had a call to make this morning to a family she had located last week. The Garfield family's former neighbors from Williams, a woman named Patrice, who had moved to Kingman with 4 children and who the Prescott organization had not yet reached. She had Patrice's number from a community directory, and she had a list of questions, and she had a referral to make if the situation was what she suspected it was. She had the letter to write to Sandra about the sentencing recommendation for Curtis Strickland, which she had researched carefully and which she had opinions about that were worth putting on record. She had 3 laps of the perimeter road still to walk because she had been on the porch when she should have been walking, and her knees would not thank her for skipping them. She had a noon meal to heat and eat before Herbert's 3 o'clock visit because she did not skip meals when someone had gone to the trouble of making soup. She had work as she always had work, as there was always work for a person who was paying attention in a world that contained no shortage of things requiring attention. She got up from her chair. She picked up her coffee mug and her aluminum walking stick. She went down the porch steps onto the gravel of Crestline Mobile Estates, the familiar crunch of it under her gray New Balance shoes, and she began her 3 laps of the perimeter road in the April morning with the mountains bright ahead of her and the sky clear and the junipers smelling of themselves in the warming air. She walked steadily without hurry. She paid attention. That was the thing. That had always been the thing. One step after another done in the right order, done thoroughly done, without looking away from whatever the morning held. She was there. She was awake. That was enough, and she knew it was enough, and the knowing was a kind of grace that she had earned through every morning of her 74 years, and she carried it forward with her into the April light, lap after lap, the mountains steady above her and the gravel sure beneath her feet. The perimeter road was a quarter-mile each circuit, which meant 3 laps was 3/4 of a mile, which was what her knees had agreed to, and what she had kept to for 2 years without negotiation. The gravel was dry today, the morning warm enough that the overnight cold had not left any frost, and the walking stick was in her hand more from habit than necessity, its familiar weight part of the rhythm of the morning. She passed Trailer 4 where Herbert's light was on, and his small radio was audible through the window, the morning news at a volume appropriate for a man who had decided that the world's events were worth knowing about again. She passed the Garfield trailer dark and quiet at this hour. The 3 children's bicycles leaned against the skirting in the specific disorder of things that were used constantly and put away approximately. She passed the back fence where the junipers grew and where the coyote announced itself on certain mornings, and today it was quiet. The coyote elsewhere, its own morning, taking it in a different direction. She came around to the east side and the mountains were directly ahead of her, the peaks fully lit, now the snow on them so bright in the April morning that you had to look slightly off-center to take them in without squinting. She stopped for a moment. She looked at the mountains, 19 years of looking at them from this road, from the east porch, from the kitchen window above the sink. 19 years of them being there, patient and enormous and entirely indifferent to the small human concerns arranged at their feet, which was not a cold indifference, but a natural one. The indifference of something that operated at a scale and on a timeline that made individual trouble look like what it was: temporary. Not unimportant, temporary. She had buried a husband and a son, and she had kept Roy's mug on the shelf and Danny's photograph pinned at the corner, and she had gotten up every morning at 5:30 for 8 years and made coffee and walked the perimeter road and done the crossword, and the mountains had been there through all of it, and they would be there through whatever came next, and that was not a comfort exactly, but it was a fact, and she had always preferred facts to comfort when the choice was available. She finished her 3rd lap. She went inside and poured the coffee she had left warming on the burner, which was one concession to routine she had made. Always leave enough for the after-walk cup, and she sat at the kitchen table in the April morning light, and she opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. Then she picked up her pen, and she began the next thing.